Hey class, welcome back to Fantasy Football University. And today we're going to look at something that has probably the greatest impact on your dynasty team, even more so than the draft, and that is the art of the trade. Trades can propel you to your finals and into the championship trophy. They can also reset your season, or they can completely tank your team. Two of those are okay, one of those is terrible. So let's figure out what it actually takes to get there. What we're going to be looking at are three main features of the trade that can influence it the most, starting with the settings of your league, understanding the motivations and needs of both the player you're trying to trade with, as well as what your team needs. Taking a quick look at the literal tools of the trade, and just for fun at the end, a couple of looks at some trades of what not to do. Starting with settings, there's a couple of key items we want to take a look at. Starting with the roster settings. The obvious one to take a look at is one quarterback versus two, or super flex as it may be. The next one would be the number of wide receivers versus the number of flex, and that can typically change back one way or the other. And now the really important one that is often forgotten is the number of roster positions available, so the number of starting positions. If we look at 10 as our baseline, the lower the number, the more valuable your elite players are. So if there's only 8 players starting out, then your CeeDee Lambs, your Josh Allens, those elite players, those are the players that you really want to focus on. On the flip side, if we are looking at 12 plus in terms of starting positions, then that starts to devalue those positions and puts more value on the larger haul of players. Next up are our scoring settings, and we're going to start with the passing TDs, typically between 4 and 6 points. The higher this is, the more value you can place on your prototypical pocket passers. After that, we're going to move over to here to receiving. Taking a look at receptions, here it's 1 point or 1 PPR, so point per reception. And scrolling down to reception bonus tight end, at which point we see this 0.5. That is typical for Dynasty, but you can see a lot of variance on there, so you need to make sure that you understand what your league is using. All right, what we're going to take a look at now are player trades, and actually specifically looking at what players or what other GMs might be looking for versus what your own requirements are. If we take a peek here on my team, I've got strong quarterback play, I've got good wide receivers, but I would like to upgrade my running backs a little bit. Not that I have any concerns with Derrick Henry or Kenneth Walker, but Henry is obviously a little bit older, and I am a little bit shallow at that position after that. So let's go back up here and click this trade button, and that's going to bring up the trade board for the entire league. It's going to show all the players cross-referenced with all of the GMs in my league. So now what we need to look at are who have what I need. So I'm looking for running backs. I've already identified a player that actually has a lot of running backs, and they've got a little bit of a excess at the position. And more importantly, they are a little bit low on something that I have an excess of, which is the tight end position. This is a tight end premium league, so that does become important. All right, so now that we've identified the player that we want to trade with, we're going to pop up here, click on the player's name, and apologies, I know that you can't actually see that under the blurring, but there you go, and then click next. And in this screen, we're actually going to see just a close-up on all of the 2 players that each manager has. So skimming down, as mentioned, looking for one of his running backs. And one of the players that I do think is going to bring back good value for this year at least is Rachaad White right here. So I'm going to click on Rachaad White. That's one of the players that I'm interested in. And coming down here, he has previously mentioned to me that he is not a huge fan of Kmet, is interested in Njoku. So Njoku versus Rachaad White. Now, I actually am interested in Kmet. I actually do think he's going to have a great season, so I'm going to put him in there and put Dalton Schultz in there. So these are the four players that I'm going to try and figure out if this makes a good trade. So this is where it gets really interesting. So now we're going to jump into the tools of the trade. Now, there are a few out there that I actually really do like. I'm a big fan of the scores played trade value using the dynasty setting, but there is one that we got to talk about. So let's jump into it. All right. Everybody's favorite love to hate site in the Dynasty world, Keep Trade Cut or KTC. If you're new to Dynasty, you may not have heard of it yet, but you will soon enough, I guarantee it. It is used by a lot of players. Some players don't like it, some players love it, some players love it too much. But typically, the players who don't like it, I find one of the things that they have problems with is how it is set up. And I think a lot of the time they're not setting it up properly, and that makes a huge difference to the value of the tool. So right now, if we pop over here, we're going to notice the Superflex button. Most leagues are Superflex, but this one in particular is, so we want to pop that on. The league is also tight end premium, so we want to pop that one on, and then into the more options. Now, if you were in startup mode, if you were pre-initial draft, you'd want to have that clicked on so you can see the value of your startup picks. For this league, we're long past that, so I want to have that off, so I'm only seeing rookie picks if it comes to it. Over here, we've got acceptable variance, which really is just your own personal allowance for how far a trade can be off. Kind of a moot point for the most part. The next one is future pick adjustment. Now, I personally think that most players in the fantasy community and in the dynasty community overvalue future picks. So I typically will move this down to about minus 5%. All right. So now previously we had identified a few players that we wanted to take a look at. So let's fill them in here. So on one side we have Rachaad White. Help if I could type his name in properly. And the other one was Cole Kmet. Over on the other side here, we had Njoku and Dalton Schultz. Apparently I'm spelling his name wrong. There we go. All right. So now if we take a look at it, as you can see, the overall package value is a little bit leaning on the Rachaad White side. And one of the things that's actually important to note here is part of it is the value adjustment. Rachaad White is the best player in the deal. Cole Kmet is also better than Dalton Schultz, but it's actually also giving an extra 850 points bonus. And that is basically on a value adjustment. And that's purely because that side of the deal is got the better players. So they're going to have the higher value bumped up. Elite players are worth more. And a lot of players will complain that, 4 quarters don't make a dollar, so KTC doesn't work. Again, if it's set properly, you're always going to have this value adjustment in here. The more elite players on one side, the more this is going to really start to take notice. All right. Now, as we look at it, we are obviously already seeing the gap there. So we can scroll down quickly, and it's going to give us a couple suggestions on who we could put in place. In this case, one of the ones that comes up is 2026 late third. That actually works for me. I can put in place a 2026. I'm going to say mid, because we don't really know what the value is going to be. So mid third. And there we have it. So now with this in there, that's actually coming to 8306, which is actually higher than the 7964. Just so you can see the difference as well. If we move that down to minus 10%, which actually I think is kind of valid since it is a 2026, 2 years out, that does bring the number down. As another example, if we turn off tight end premium, right now Cole Kmet is at 3,100 as an example, turn that off. His value drops all the way down to 2,700. So again, make sure their settings are right, and the tool can be quite useful. Can't be the only thing you work off of, but it does give you a really good value. I strongly recommend a lot of players utilize this, particularly the new players to Dynasty, because it gives you that starting point when you are starting your trade conversations. Now, quickly popping back over to Sleeper, that trade option that we'd had up earlier is still there, but we know that wasn't quite fair based on KTC, so let's look to add a draft pick in there. Now, turns out I'd actually already traded away my 2026 third, so let's pop that 2025 third in there, add that to the trade, and send it off. I hope this video was helpful. And on a final note, unless you want to see your name on Reddit with a Bugs Bunny meme, check those trades before you send them off. If this is helpful, like and subscribe. Thanks, guys.